The sun had not fully risen when Lakshmi Pichai stepped out of the small auto rickshaw, her soft cotton sari fluttering gently in the early morning breeze. The cream fabric with a faded pink border clung to her frame like an old memory. Sandals touched the cobbled road in front of the Majestic. Delhi Administrative Complex, a place where the country's most powerful decisions were made. In her hands, she carried nothing but a cloth pouch stitched with her own hands and a tiffin box filled with home-cooked lemon rice. She was here to see her son, but the gate was closed, not just physically, but symbolically. Two armed guards stood alert, emotionless. They didn't flinch when she quietly walked up to them, her voice barely louder than the breeze. "Beta, I am here to see Sundar. Sundarpa." "Hey, is my son." One of the guards blinked, confused. The name caught his attention. "Ma'am, you can't enter without prior clearance. Who did you say again?" Lakshmi didn't know the protocols of high offices. She didn't know that you needed an appointment to meet your own son, especially when your son was the guest of honor inside a building guarded like a fortress. She simply smiled with kindness. "I just came to give him lunch. ... He always forgets to eat when he is nervous." The other guard, younger and slightly more empathetic, hesitated. He looked at her tiffin box, then at her face. She didn't look like a protester or a journalist. She looked like someone's mother, someone important, but he was under orders. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. No entry allowed, even for family. Please call ahead." Lakshmi stepped back. Her face didn't change. She wasn't angry. She didn't shout. Instead, she walked a few steps away from the gate and sat down on the stone bench beside a neem tree. She waited. Inside the hall, Sundar Pichai sat at the head of a long oval table, his back straight, dressed in a simple black suit and white shirt. His eyes were focused, but his hands were clenched under the table. This was not an ordinary meeting. The Prime Minister was present. Our major industrial leaders, ministers, and global figures. The country was about to announce a bold new tech education partnership. Sundar was the one chosen to lead it, but he didn't know his mother was outside. As Modi ji leaned forward to speak, his voice calm yet commanding, "Sundar ji, your proposal has impressed everyone in this room. It's not just your vision, ... it's your humility. India's proud of you." Sundar nodded politely, thanked him, but something inside felt hollow. Meanwhile, outside the gate, the neem tree offered some shade. Lakshmi wasn't in a rush. She watched people go in and out. Cars with tinted windows, assistants with walkie-talkies, journalists with cameras. Not one of them stopped to ask why an elderly woman sat silently with a tiffin box at the side of one of the most important government buildings in India. The younger guard finally walked over and asked, "Aunty ... ... Would you like water?" She smiled. "No, Beta, but thank you." He crouched beside her. "Is it really true? You are Sundar Pichai's mother?" Lakshmi nodded, almost shyly. "Yes, he never forgets to call me. But today he was in a hurry. I thought he would need food. It's his favorite. I added extra peanuts." The guard blinked fast. Something in him stirred. "Why didn't you tell the world? People would bow to you." She chuckled softly, brushing a speck of dust from her sari. "Why should they? I only did what a mother should do." Back inside, the session took a sharp turn. Few bureaucrats were questioning Sundar's motives. One official from a northern state, skeptical of global partnerships, said bluntly, "It's easy for you to come from abroad and lecture us, Mr. Pichai, but do you really understand the ground reality of rural India?" Sundar didn't flinch. He simply said, "I grew up in Chennai, in a modest home. My mother raised us with discipline. My father taught us to dream. I understand more than you think." The room fell silent for a moment. Modi ji looked at him with interest, then glanced at his secretary and whispered something. The secretary nodded and walked out. At that same moment, the younger guard stepped away from his post and made a risky decision. He called a number. Is this Mr. Pichai's office?" Yes, who's calling? My name is Eamon. I'm a gate officer at the south entrance. There's an elderly woman here. She says she's Mr. Sundar Pichai's mother. The voice on the line changed tone immediately. Wait, what? Yes, sir. She's been sitting here for over an hour. Within minutes, chaos began. Calls were made, assistants rushed, orders shouted inside. Sundar's phone vibrated, looked at it and froze. The message read, "Your mother is waiting outside the gate." He stood up. Everyone turned. Never interrupted meetings, especially not one chaired by the Prime Minister, sir. Sundar said softly, "I just received word. My mother is outside. She came to bring me food." I wasn't expecting her. Before anyone else could speak, Modi ji raised his hand. "Let her in. Immediately. And make sure she is brought in with respect." Sundar exhaled, quietly. But what happened next was something even he couldn't have expected. As Lakshmi was escorted through the hallway, still holding her tiffin box, hundreds of eyes turned. Officers, dignitaries. Journalists all stared at the frail woman in a simple sari walking down the polished marble floors of one of the most powerful places in the nation. But Lakshmi didn't walk with pride. She walked with grace. The doors opened to the main chamber. Everyone stood up. Sundar rushed to her. I'm sorry. Lakshmi looked around. She nodded at the Prime Minister, then turned to Sundar. "You're looking tired, Kana. Come, eat something." Modi ji smiled. But before Lakshmi could sit, one minister whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "This is highly irregular. Who brings their mother to such a high-level meeting?" Ksh. May heard it. So did Sundar. Everyone watched her, and she didn't say a word. She simply looked at the man, then looked away. Her silence was louder than 1,000 protests in that. Silence. Simple, gentle, but filled with dignity, spread across the room like a quiet storm. Even the Prime Minister leaned forward and said, "Sometimes silence teaches more than speeches ever can." Sundar looked at his mother. For years he had stood on global stages, spoken to thousands, managed billion-dollar decisions. But here, standing beside the woman who had raised him with rice and stories and silence, he felt small in the best possible. She handed him the tiffin, and that was the moment the cameras clicked, capturing an image that would spread across the world in hours. But the story was just beginning, because what Lakshmi didn't know was that her presence, her silence would soon spark a storm no one saw coming. And by the time the next day arrived, the world wouldn't just talk about Sundar Pichai's brilliance. They would ask about the woman who said nothing, but changed everything. The photograph had already gone viral by the time the evening news began. Lakshmi Pichai, standing beside her son, holding a steel tiffin in one hand and a calm expression on her face, had captivated the nation. It wasn't a staged photo. There were no flashing lights or pre-planned handshakes. It was a quiet moment, a mother bringing lunch to her son during the most important meeting of his life. Yet that simple act, and the dignified silence that followed when she was quietly questioned by a minister, had sent ripples through the corridors of power and across. Millions of screens in homes throughout the country, news anchors tried to explain it. Opinion writers tried to analyze it. Some called it a reminder of the forgotten roots of leadership. Others said it was a subtle but powerful protest against arrogance and power. To Sundar, it wasn't any of that. To him, it was just his MO. That night, as the lights of New Delhi glittered beyond the large windows of his hotel suite, Sundar sat by the bedside, his laptop still open but untouched. Lakshmi was folding her sari neatly, the same way she had done every night since he was a child. Her eyes were gentle, but her mind had seen the world that day in a way it never had before. "Amma," finally said, breaking the silence. "I'm sorry." She looked at him. "For what, Kana? I should have arranged a pass for you. You should not have been made to wait like that." Lakshmi gave a soft smile. "It's okay. I waited because I wanted to, not because I was forced. Besides, the bench under the neem tree had nice shade." Sundar's eyes welled slightly. "They shouldn't have spoken to you like that." Her response was almost a whisper. "But I didn't speak back. Nah." And that was the truth. Her silence hadn't come from fear or submission or discomfort. It came from strength. It's the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself to anyone. Sundar, even with all his accolades, knew that was a kind of power he would never fully understand. But outside that hotel suite, the world was reacting very differently. Social media exploded with divided opinions. Some praised the Prime Minister for standing up and allowing Lakshmi into the chamber. Others criticized the minister, who questioned her presence, saying he had disrespected motherhood and humility. Influencers shared personal stories about their own mothers. Political commentators debated the deeper meaning of silence in a world driven by noise. And then came the moment that no one expected. Lakshmi. Pichai was invited to speak at the National Women's Forum the next week. The invitation came in the form of a handwritten letter from the chairwoman of the forum herself, a woman who had once cleaned classrooms for a living and now led a panel that advised policymakers on women's empowerment. The note read, "Your silence gave voice to millions. If you can, come speak to us. Not as a leader, as a mother." Sundar showed her the letter. She looked at it carefully and folded it and said, "If they want me to speak, I will speak, but not in English." He laughed. "Amma, you can speak however you want." "Good," she replied. "Then I'll speak in Tamil. Let them arrange for a translator." But deep inside, Sundar felt a quiet nervousness rising. Not about the event, but about the storm that had begun to build. Because the minister who had whispered that comment in the hall, the one who had questioned Lakshmi's presence, was now facing a backlash. His own political party was distancing itself from his words. Media houses were digging into his past statements. And behind closed doors, he had begun to grow resentful. The backlash wasn't just professional. It was personal. A leaked video surfaced online, a clip of the minister making dismissive remarks about people who rise too high without pedigree. Though he didn't name Sundar or Lakshmi directly, the timing was unmistakable. The comments were seen as an attack, not just on them, but on the idea that humility and simplicity had no place in power. Sundar received a call from an old college friend that night. "Bro, this isn't about you anymore. They're turning this into a cultural war." "What do you mean?" Sundar asked. "Your mother represents something a lot of people fear. The idea that someone who never chased attention could still be the most respected person in the room. It scares them." Sundar rubbed his forehead. "She didn't ask for any of this. That's exactly why she got it." As the National Women's Forum approached, Lakshmi remained calm. She didn't rehearse speeches. She didn't ask for a stylist or a press advisor. Instead, she asked Sundar to take her to a local market so she could buy some jasmine flowers for her hair. "I want to look like myself," she said. On the day of the forum, the auditorium was packed. Journalists, ministers, students, activists, and foreign delegates filled the seats. Giant screens broadcasted the event live. Sundar sat quietly in the third row, not as a speaker, not as a CEO, but as a son. Lakshmi walked up to the podium. Slowly, the hall fell silent. She looked at the crowd.
Oh.
She didn't smile. She didn't wave. Instead, she began in Tamil. "I am not used to speaking to such big crowds. In my life, I have only spoken to children, to neighbors, and sometimes to myself when the house was empty. But I have something to share, not because I am special, but because my silence was heard." The translator repeated her words in Hindi and English. She paused, then continued, her voice steady. "When my son was born, we didn't have much. I used to save 5 rupees a week so I could buy him books, used to ask a lot of questions, most of which I couldn't answer, but I never stopped him from asking." The hall leaned in closer. "People say he became great. Greatness means, to me, greatness is not forgetting who you are, even after the whole world knows your name." She turned her head slightly, looking directly at the camera. "And to those who think silence is weakness, let me say this. Sometimes silence is what remains when truth does not need defense." You could hear a pin drop in that room. Sundar felt his chest tighten. Lakshmi ended her short speech with just one sentence. I did not come here to speak. I came so others would remember what it feels like to listen. When she walked off the stage, the standing ovation was not wild or loud. It was slow, deliberate. It's almost reverent. Even the most hardened faces in the crowd had softened. But backstage, someone else had been watching. The same minister who had once whispered his doubts. His face was not softened. It was cold, because his political survival now felt threatened by the image of an old woman in a simple sorry, someone he could never control. Someone whose voice didn't shout but still commanded silence. He made a phone call. Dig deeper. Into her background, he said. There must be something. Now, one is that perfect. A journalist overheard the call. The next morning, Sundar received an anonymous email with a recording of the conversation. He sat motionless for a while. He thought of ignoring it, but then he thought of his mother, sitting under a neem tree. Waiting patiently at a gate that should have opened, he knew it was time to act. But how do you defend someone who never asked for defense? As he stared out the window at the sprawling Delhi skyline, Sundar realized something deep. His mother's silence had shaken a system built on noise, and now that system was preparing to strike back. What would he do? What could he do? His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was an invitation from Modi ji, a private meeting, urgent. And by the time the next day arrived, the world wouldn't just talk about Sundar Pichai's brilliance. They would ask about the woman who said nothing, changed everything. The days that followed were like a steady storm. It didn't come all at once. There was no lightning, no roaring thunder. Instead, it moved quietly, softly, like a slow drizzle soaking everything, one rumor at a time. For Lakshmi Pichai, life had returned to what she believed was normal. She continued to rise early, offering prayers, preparing food for Sundar, even though he was often caught up in meetings,
and walking barefoot across the polished marble floor of the Delhi guest house.
like it was still her modest Chennai kitchen. But what she didn't realize was that outside the gates of that calm space, a carefully planted campaign had begun to spread. The first blow came in the form of a prime-time panel show, under bright studio lights, for talking heads, and a perfectly combed anchor sat in front of flickering graphics with bold captions. The mystery of Lakshmi Pichai. Is there more than meets the eye? They didn't accuse directly. No one used harsh words. But suggestion is a weapon far sharper than truth when wielded by the clever. We don't know her background, one panelist said. Why now? Why show up at this exact event? Asked. Another. It's a bit too perfect, isn't it? A third chimed in. A global CEO, a humble mother, a media storm. It feels scripted. Meanwhile, Lakshmi was boiling tea in the kitchen, humming softly, unaware that her image was being deconstructed for the sake of evening ratings. Sundar had been warned. One of his internal communications team sent a message late at night. Sir, they're trying to turn the silence into a lie. They want doubt to do what facts never could. Sundar stared at the message for a long time. He could handle attacks on his policies, his decisions, even his company. But this was different. Amma, he said at breakfast the next morning. People are saying things about you. They're trying to twist the truth. Lakshmi placed two idealies on his plate. What things they're questioning? Why you came? They're making up stories. She poured the sambar gently over the idealists. Let them. But Kanna, if the wind speaks, do you argue with it? No, you close the window and wait. He wanted to argue. His logical mind craved a counterattack. He had teams of legal advisors, media strategists, and a direct line to global newsrooms. But here was his mother telling him to do ... nothing. That same afternoon, Modi ji sent a private message through an aide. You should prepare. The opposition will not let this story rest. Protect your mother. But what did protection mean for a woman who had walked through life without armor? No titles, no bodyguards, no press managers. Just strength wrapped in silence. The narrative was shifting in the public. Some believed her story, some doubted, and some of those most dangerous pretended to admire her while secretly working to erase her. In the following days, Minister Yashwant's team released a carefully constructed investigative report. It was framed as concern, as transparency. But it was full of subtle poison. It pointed to a long-forgotten neighbor dispute. From years ago, where Lakshmi had refused to vacate a rented property despite government pressure, they hinted that she may have had help, perhaps illegal support from influential people. There was no proof. It's only suspicion. But that was enough. Online trolls took over from there. Photos were edited, captions manipulated. Hashtags like hashtag truth about LAKSHMI and hashtag Sundar scam began trending. Sundar watched it unfold like a nightmare in daylight. Every newspaper carried a line. Every channel aired a panel. The silence that had once inspired the nation was now being framed as suspicious. But Lakshmi never once reacted. One morning, she prepared mango pickle in the kitchen. He asked her plainly, "How are you not angry?" She looked at him, her hands covered in turmeric and chili powder, and said, "Because anger is for the weak. Those who know their truth do not need to fight over it." He sat down at the table, overwhelmed. AMMA. ... It's not fair. Fairness, she said, is not promised by the world. It is practiced by the self. He stared at her, remembering the nights she stayed up to sew his school shirt back together. How she would silently fix the broken radio his father used, and how she never once raised her voice even when there was no food for dinner. And now she was being accused of manipulation, of using her son, of being too perfect, as if dignity had become a threat. But the world was not entirely blind, because in one remote village in Tamil Nadu, a young schoolteacher named Shanti watched these headlines with pain. She had once been a student of Lakshmi, pichai in a community reading program. When her father died, Lakshmi had brought her textbooks every month for 2 years without asking for anything in return. Shanti still remembered the exact words Lakshmi had said on the first day she visited her hut. "If you can read, you can stand." Now, as she watched the country try to knock Lakshmi down, she took out her phone and began to write. Her post read, "I don't know politics. I don't know media, but I know this. Lakshmi Auntie once walked 8 kilometers just to bring me books. I wasn't her family. I was just a girl in a hut. If that woman is being questioned, then maybe it's not her that's broken, it's the mirror we're using." The post was shared over 5 million times in 2 days. More followed former students, neighbors, vendors, guards. Even an old milkman wrote a message on a slip of paper. I photographed it, and it went viral. She always returned exact change. Even when no one was watching, the people had started to fight back. Truth had begun to echo louder than rumors. But still, the minister and his allies wouldn't stop. Their last move was the most dangerous. They filed a request for formal, claiming misuse of public attention for political influence. It was just paperwork. It's just bureaucracy. But it carried the scent of scandal. And once a scandal begins, it doesn't matter if it's true. The hearing was to be held quietly, just an administrative meeting, but word leaked. When Sundar heard about it, he asked Lakshmi Amma, "They want to question you, not in court?" But behind closed doors, "Let them," she said. "You shouldn't go." "Why not?" "Because you shouldn't have to explain silence." She gently touched his cheek. "Maybe, but sometimes silence must walk into noise, to remind it what quiet dignity feels like." On the morning of the inquiry, Lakshmi dressed in the same cream sari she had worn that day at the gate. Jasmine flowers in her hair, no makeup, no jewelry, just herself. As they approached the government building, Sundar reached for her hand. "Do you want me to come in?" Lakshmi looked at him. "No, Kana. This path is mine. Yours came much harder, but this one is light compared to what you walked." He stood back as she walked alone up the steps, but he didn't leave. He stood outside, waiting, just as she once had for him, inside the room. 4 officials sat in silence as Lakshmi entered. They didn't expect what they saw. No fear, no arrogance. Just calm. "Mrs. Pichai," one of them began, "we are conducting a preliminary review of your public involvement in recent events. It has raised questions about propriety. Lakshmi sat. She didn't interrupt. Didn't defend. Another official. Continued, some believe your presence was orchestrated to influence government optics. She simply said, I brought lunch for my son. And did you intend to attend the session? No. I sat under a tree, and when you entered, I was called in. Do you deny that your presence altered the public perception? Lakshmi tilted her head slightly. A flower blooms. And someone takes a photo? Do you ask the flower if it was planned? They fell silent. Then she said, I am not a politician, not a celebrity. I didn't walk into the room for the country. I walked in because my son forgot to eat. The panel sat quietly. They had no further questions. And as she stood to leave, one of them, an elderly man near retirement, rose unexpectedly and said, Madam, for what it's worth, I watched that moment, and I've served for governments. But I've never seen a room fall silent because of grace. Lakshmi only nodded. When she walked out, Sundar ran to her. Are you okay? She smiled. But as they walked to the car, a journalist shouted from the crowd, Mrs. Pichai, how does it feel to have survived your first political scandal? Lakshmi turned, and for the first time, she answered with more than silence. Child, I didn't survive anything. I lived. The cameras froze. The crowd fell quiet, and that one sentence went on to be carved into placards, printed on t-shirts and quoted in parliaments. But while the nation applauded, another shadow had begun to form in secret. Someone, somewhere, was planning something much darker. Because silence may defeat a whisper, but can it stand against a lie? After the inquiry ended, after the applause faded, after the tweets slowed and the hashtags cooled, Lakshmi Pichai returned to what she always considered her true identity, not a symbol, not a figure of resistance, but simply a mother. She quietly packed her tiffin containers, made an extra batch of Sundar's favorite chutney, and went to bed before the moon could climb too high in the sky. But while she slept peacefully, the real battle began. This time, it wasn't on the news. It wasn't trending on social media. It wasn't even whispered in parliament halls. It was crafted in silence, forged behind closed doors, because those who had tried to bring her down with questions had failed. Those who tried to shake her with doubt had been silenced by her poise. Now the only weapon left was a lie, but not an obvious one. It's not the kind people could icily reject. This lie would be gentle, believable, woven with just enough truth to sting. 3 nights after her inquiry, an anonymous file was dropped into the inbox of a well-known investigative journalist named Rishi Malhotra. It was marked with no name, no sender, just a subject line. Truth about Sundar's rise. Rishi was known for exposing corporate scandals. His past reports had brought down 2 CEOs and forced a government minister to resign. He wasn't reckless. He didn't publish without proof. But when he opened the file, he found something that made him pause. Bank documents, transfer receipts. It's an old land deal. They all seemed ordinary at first, except one caught his eye. It showed a large donation from an international foundation made out in the name of Lakshmi Pichai. The year was 1998. The amount was large for someone who, at that time, lived in a one-room apartment in Chennai. Why would a foreign foundation send money to a homemaker in India? Muttered. He did what any good journalist would. He investigated. He called people, checked addresses, traced the origin of the foundation. It had long since shut down, but the board had once included a man later accused of global lobbying violations. The more Rishi dug, the stranger it seemed, and then he made the call that changed everything. Hello, he said into the receiver. Is this Sundar Pichai's office? Yes. May I ask who's calling? My name is Rishi Malhotra. I'm a journalist. I have some documents regarding your CEO's mother. I'd like a comment. The voice on the other end stiffened. What sort of documents? Financial, related to foreign donations. Please hold. There was a long silence. Then Sundar himself picked up the line. This is Sundar. What documents do you have? Rishi explained. Everything, his tone measured, not aggressive. Sundar listened quietly. But inside, his heart began to pound. I don't know anything about Such a transaction, he said. I don't think my mother does either. She never even had a passport back then. Rishi sighed. I thought that might be the case. But the papers look real. Someone is trying to plant a narrative, Sundar, and it's not sloppy. How long do I have? Dar asked. Before someone else leaks it, not long. Maybe a day, maybe less. After the call, Sundar sat alone in his office. He remembered the day his mother had cried quietly when she had to sell her only gold chain to pay for his college entrance exam fees. He remembered the way she held the receipt in her hand like it was sacred. How could the world believe? She had accepted money she never even knew existed. He walked into the guest suite where Lakshmi was trimming the stems of some tulsi leaves. Amma, I asked, do you remember ever receiving any money from an international organization? Back in 1998, she looked up, eyes curious. No, never. I was barely making ends meet. Why? He sat beside her. Someone has forged a transaction. They want to make it seem like our life was funded. She frowned gently. But our life was full of struggle. I know, I remember. But they want to rewrite that story. Make people believe your silence was bought, not born. Lakshmi went quiet for a moment. Then she said something that hit him harder than any headline ever could. If the world thinks silence is weakness, they will always search for a noise behind it, even if they have to invent it. The next morning, Rishi's article dropped. He didn't accuse, he reported. Carefully, the headline read, A question of timing, was Sundar's rise truly self-made? Inside, the article laid out the documents, the details, the doubts, but also Sundar's response, and Lakshmi's lifelong records of simplicity. It was balanced, but the damage had been done. The public didn't always read full stories. They read headlines, and the whispers began again. Maybe she did accept it. How else do you go from Chennai to Silicon Valley? Everyone has a past. Sundar was invited to appear on a major news debate to clear the air. He refused. Instead, he walked into the National Press Club and requested a personal media session, not with cameras, not with handlers. Just words as journalists packed the room. He stood on the stage alone. Thank you for being here, he began. His voice calm, but unmistakably firm. I am not here to defend a number or explain a bank record. I am here to tell you what no paper will ever print. He paused. My mother didn't raise me with dollars. She raised me with discipline. She taught me how to share one dosa between 3 people, how to walk to school without shoes, how to stay still when I was angry, and to keep walking when I was tired. He took a breath. If someone has forged documents to attack her, then they've already lost, because you cannot undo decades of truth with a single lie. Reporters stopped scribbling. You can debate policies. You can challenge leaders. But if your strategy is to invent a false history just to win the present, then you're not fighting corruption. You're fighting character. He ended with one final sentence, and character cannot be defeated. It can only be misunderstood. As he walked off the stage, the room didn't clap. They stood in silence, and that silence became the loudest thing on the internet that day. But back at the government offices, Yashwant Rao watched in frustration. His plan had failed, and yet he still had one more move. He summoned a senior bureaucrat and whispered, If we can't touch him, we touch the ones who trusted him. What do you mean? Pull his education plan. Say it's under review. Freeze the initiative. Make it look like we're being cautious, but it's already past the approval stage. Reopen it. And that night, just before Sundar and Lakshmi sat down for dinner, a letter arrived to Mr. Sundar Pichai. The Tech Education Partnership proposal is hereby placed under ministerial review. Due to new disclosures surrounding the Pichai family's financial history, project funding is suspended until further notice. Sundar read it twice, then slowly handed it to Lakshmi. She looked at it, folded it neatly, and placed it beside her plate. Then she said softly, Eat now, Kanna. Can answer it tomorrow, but today your mind must be fed. He looked at Hearth, a woman who had done everything with so little, yet given so much. He ate. But inside, something was rising. Not anger, not fear, conviction because the lie had knocked, but it had not entered. And now, It was time to build a door no lie could pass through. The door that no lie could pass through, thought Knight. The weight of the suspension letter sat quietly on the table between them and moving, yet heavier than anything either of them had carried before. It was a letter that didn't shout, didn't accuse, didn't even say the word guilt, and yet it carried the power to stall a nationwide dream. A dream that Sundar had worked for years to shape, his mother had unknowingly become the soul of. Lakshmi didn't touch the letter again after placing it down. She simply served him rice with rasam, her movements calm, her breath steady, as though the world hadn't just questioned everything her son stood for. But Sundar couldn't swallow. Each bite felt dry, like dust on his tongue. Not because of the food his mother's cooking still held the same warmth, but because of the silence growing in his chest. Not his mother's silence, but his own. The silence of helplessness. After dinner, he stepped outside the guest house, letting the cool night air fill his lungs. The garden smelled of wet earth and mogra. Above him, Delhi's sky glowed dimly behind the clouds, city lights painting the stars out of view. Somewhere far away, a temple bell rang. It felt like a whisper trying to reach him across time. Sundar walked slowly past the hedges until he reached the edge of the compound, where two guards stood watching the street. He looked beyond them, watching the dark road that stretched into the city, into chaos, into politics, into everything that now threatened to define his mother's character. How had it come to this? How had a moment meant to be simpler, mother bringing food to her son, become a battleground? The next morning, he met with his closest team of advisors. They had gathered discreetly in a private conference room on the outskirts of the city. No media, no public statement, just strategy. "We have 3 options," said Naina, his senior legal aide. 1. We challenge the ministerial review with evidence and make it political. 2. We go to court and call it suppression of a private citizen. Or 3. We launch something even bigger and leave them behind. Sundar didn't speak immediately. He stared at the table where a glass of water sat untouched. "And if we do nothing?" he asked finally. The room fell silent. "Then they rewrite the story," said Naina. "Not just yours, your Ema's too. They turn her into a headline that fades." Sundar nodded. "Double quotes, then we do option 4, he said. Everyone looked up. "What's option 4? One advisor asked. "We show the world who she really is, not through debates, not through lawsuits. Through her story." Lakshmi didn't understand why so many people came to the house that week. She wasn't used to cameras. She wasn't used to lights or wires or people adjusting microphones around her. But when Sundar sat down next to her and said, "Amma, just tell your life as it was." "That's all," she nodded. And so over the next few days, Sundar's team recorded her. No scripts, no planning, just her voice. Telling stories of standing in long queues for ration, stories of stitching other people's blouses for money, stories of sitting by a broken fan on hot nights and telling Sundar bedtime tales of kings who never raised their voices, but still ruled with grace. She told of how she had once walked 3 kilometers just to borrow a library book for Sundar, because she had heard he wanted to learn what the internet was. But the family couldn't afford an encyclopedia. She laughed when she recalled how Sundar had once tried to fix a broken radio using rubber bands and a matchstick, how he cried when it didn't work, and in one quiet moment, she said, "Never taught him how to change the world. I only taught him how to never change himself." They recorded all of it. Then Sundar's team released a short film. It was titled simply, "My Amma, The Silence Behind the Signal." The video opened not with grand music or shots of boardrooms, but with Lakshmi sitting on the floor, rolling chapatis. "My name is Lakshmi," she said in Tamil, with subtitles, "and I'm a mother." It exploded. Within hours, it was shared by millions, not just in India, but across the world. Tech leaders, teachers, farmers, nurses, students, people who had never cared about politics or policies, were now talking about a woman who would become a mirror of every silent pillar in their own lives. Even the harshest critics found themselves quiet. How do you argue with a story told with no pride, no anger, no defense? You don't. And that's when the narrative cracked. Inside Parliament, some members began to question why the education proposal had really been suspended. Are we punishing sincerity? One member asked. Even those who had once whispered against. Sundar were now shifting in their seats. But the most unexpected moment came during a public event. Hosted by Modi ji in a large auditorium packed with young entrepreneurs, journalists, and foreign diplomats, the Prime Minister took the stage. He was expected to talk about innovation, about infrastructure, about vision instead. He began with this. There are moments in history when power comes not from position, but from presence. Last month we saw one such moment when a mother walked into a room not to speak, but to remind us what humility looks like. The crowd fell silent. Modi ji continued. Lakshmi Pichai didn't write a policy. She didn't launch a program. She didn't sit on a panel. And yet, she moved this country. Not with her words, but with her walk. He paused, then looked into the cameras. And I say this today, not as a prime minister, but as a son. We must protect our mothers, not just from crime, but from character assassination. The applause that followed was not thunderous. It was long, deep, steady, respectful. And with that, the story began to turn. The ministry reinstated the education program quietly, without apology. The forged documents were traced. They had originated from a shell account tied to a private political consultant with links to Minister Y.S. HWANT. When confronted, the minister denied everything, but it was too late. One by one, even his own party members began distancing themselves. Within weeks, he resigned, not publicly, not with drama, but with a single line. The public no longer trusts me. And Sundar. He didn't hold a press conference. He didn't post a victory message. Instead, he took his mother back to Chennai. She asked him why. Because this story began at our old gate, he said. And I think it should end there too. But it wasn't the end, because something was still waiting. Something that even Sundar hadn't expected. As they reached their old home, a crowd had gathered, neighbors, students, even a few elders who remembered Lakshmi as the woman who had once taught kids under a banyan tree using just chalk and passion. Someone had tied jasmine garlands across the rusted red gate. An old woman in the crowd stepped forward. She held a folded envelope in her hand. Lakshmi, she said, this was left here 2 days ago, addressed to you. Lakshmi took it gently. She opened the letter as she read. Her hands trembled not with fear but with disbelief. The letter was short, no signature, no sender, but it said, your silence humbled me, your dignity ended my war. This will never happen. Again, you've already won. A single pressed marigold petal was folded inside. She handed the letter to Sundar. He read it, and he knew exactly who had sent it. The man who had once whispered to tear them down, and now that man had left a note. Not of apology, but of surrender, because in the end, even power must bow before peace. The evening breeze moved gently through the narrow lanes of Chennai, brushing against old windows, temple bells, and the edges of worn saris drying on rooftops. The city didn't know it was witnessing a quiet history.
There were no firecrackers.
No parades, no slogans. Just a mother and son returning to the home where it had all begun. Lakshmi Pichai stepped into her old house, barefoot the same way she always had. Her feet touched the cool red oxide floor, the same floor she had scrubbed for decades, the same floor where Sundar had once spilled ink trying to solve his first math problem. Nothing inside had changed. The radio still sat crooked on the wooden shelf. The wall clock still ticked, slow but steady. The kitchen still smelled faintly of roasted mustard seeds and coconut oil, like memories clinging to corners. Sundar looked around, wordless. For all the stages he had stood on, for all the airports and boardrooms he had passed through, no place ever felt this permanent. Ma, he said quietly, I want you to rest now. Lakshmi turned to him. Rest from what? From carrying this family. From being strong when no one saw. From giving the world more than it ever gave you. She smiled. That was never a burden. It was love. Outside, a few neighbors had gathered. Not out of curiosity, but out of respect. They didn't knock. They didn't demand photos. They just stood under the streetlight, watching the gate that once separated struggle from success. One old man, barely able to walk without his stick, whispered to his grandson, "You see that lady? She taught my daughter the alphabet under a tree. Today her son teaches the world." But the story wasn't done. Not yet, because something remarkable happened that week. The United Nations sent a letter. The Secretary General personally invited Lakshmi Pichai to speak at the upcoming Global Summit on Education and Human Dignity. It was the first time in history that a homemaker with no formal accolades, no international degrees, no titles, just a life of quiet strength had been invited. To address world leaders, Sundar showed her the letter. "Amma, they want to hear you." She looked at it for a long moment, then said, "Do they want a speech? Only if you want to give one." "I'll speak," she said softly. "Not for them, for the women who are still waiting outside." Closed gates. A few weeks later, the world watched in awe as Lakshmi Pichai stepped onto the grand stage of the United Nations. General Assembly, she wore a white cotton sari with a gold border. Jasmine flowers adorned her hair. No makeup, no fanfare, just dignity. Sundar walked with her up to the steps. Then he stopped. "You go," he whispered. "This stage belongs to you." Lakshmi turned. She placed a hand on his cheek.
Always
"Belonged to the world. Today, I'll borrow it from you for a moment." Then she walked to the podium, the hall filled with presidents, prime ministers, ambassadors, and media giants fell into a hush so complete it felt like the earth had paused. Lakshmi adjusted the microphone. She did not read from a paper. She simply began, "I am not used to big halls. In my home, I spoke in small kitchens, small words. But today, I am here because my silence was heard. And maybe someone else's can be too." The translators. Voice echoed her words into 100 languages. But no one waited for the translation. Her tone, her expression, her presence spoke before the words ever arrived. "I raised my children with the strength to ask questions, but more importantly, with the strength to listen. I taught them to bend before breaking, and to speak only when silence would be misunderstood." She paused. "People now say, I am strong. But I was always strong. Only now, the world decided to look." The audience was still. Lakshmi looked around the grand room and said, "Millions of mothers in this world are silent, not because they have nothing to say, but because no one asked them it today. You asked me, and I answered with a story. Not of success, but of sacrifice." She closed with one sentence that would circle the world for decades. In the end, silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of truth. As she stepped down, the room didn't erupt into noise. It rose slowly, respectfully,
Out at once.
into a standing ovation. And the world stood for a woman who had once stood outside a gate, holding a lunchbox, waiting to be seen, back in India. The image of Lakshmi at the UN was printed on front pages, billboards, and textbooks. She never returned to politics, didn't start a foundation. She didn't write a memoir. She simply went home, but the gate in front of her house never closed again. Children from neighboring towns visited just to sit by the steps. They asked her to tell them stories, not of her son's success, but of how she had once told him, "If you do good quietly, the world will eventually make noise for you." So it did. Even Minister Yashwanhu had once tried to bury. Her story was never heard from again in public life. Some said he had left the city. Others said he had begun teaching at a rural school. No one knew for sure. But one day, a young boy delivered a parcel to Lasham. It had no return address. Inside was a single book of Tamil poems. On the first page was written, "The woman who defeated me without saying a word." Lakshmi smiled gently and placed it next to her tulsi plant. As for Sundar, he returned to work. The education initiative launched across multiple states. He visited rural schools with his amma. He helped install solar-powered internet in villages where children had never seen a screen, but he never walked into a meeting again without remembering what his mother once told him, "Be the same boy Who sat by the red gate, even when the gate is golden now? And he did, because now the whole world had learned what Sundar had always known, that his greatest teacher never entered a classroom, never needed to say much at all.